And here's where we're headed. We're going to start working on our floating cubes animation. So we're going to be using all the techniques we've already learned about and applying a few new ones. And our very first step is to take the cube and turn it into the idle cube animation. And our very first step is our scene setup. Starting here in a fresh scene, and we're going to need two cubes to work with. One emitter object and one render object. So I'm going to Shift E, escape. I'm going to rename these to be cube emitter. And then we're going to do cube beveled. So the beveled one is going to be our rendered object. I'm going to temporarily hide the cube emitter so I can see this a little bit better, and then go ahead and add in a bevel modifier. I'm going to go down pretty low on the amount to 0.05 and then set the segments to 3, and then that's going to be our renderable cube object. And then from here, I'll hide the cube beveled, turn on our cube emitter. Then we'll go ahead and go over to the Geometry Nodes tab and get that set up just by hitting New in the new Geometry Nodes panel. Now this next step is optional, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to make a bigger node graph for me to work with throughout the remainder of the course. So first I'm going to need a new 3D window, so I'm going to window, do new window, and I'm going to go ahead and change the panel type over to 3D viewport, and we're going to work with that. And then I'm going to do a new window, and then I'm going to set that to my spreadsheet. So now what I'm working with is basically I have two floating windows. I got my spreadsheet handy, I'm going to go ahead and move that off the frame, and then I'm going to go to my node graph down here, select it, hit Control Space to maximize that, and then I'm going to go ahead and snap my 3D view over to the side and begin working. So now I have a really big node graph and a really big 3D view, and it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to see. Now step number 3 is to do the same noise set position as we did for our dust. So this is going to be mostly review. So I'm going to go through this pretty quick. So I'm going to do a mesh to volume to convert this to a volume. Now we can see we have our volume set up in our 3D view. I'm going to go ahead and do another distribute onto volume. Now we're starting to get our point cloud. I'm going to go up on the density. I'm going to raise that up to a value of 20. So we get a lot of points to work with. Now we need to set the default animation. We're going to do that with our set position and our noise setup just like we did before. So I'll drop down a noise texture. I'll drop down a vector math to offset that so that it's going in both positive and negative space. Plug that into offset, do negative 0.5 on the offset. And now what we should see is now it's going in 3-dimensional space. Now we'll set up the animation. So I'll switch this over to 40 to get our animation, to get the W slider. And then we're going to need our scene time along with our math node to do the multiplication for our scene time. So scene seconds into value, multiply, and then that goes into W. Now at this point, we should be able to see it animate. So I'm going to go ahead and space to see animation. Right now it's going way too fast. So I'll go ahead and lower the value down to somewhere like 0.1. And that's just going to make it go slower. And that brings us to step number 4, which is setting up our instances. So we'll do another instance on points, just like we did before. And now our instance object, we need to actually bring our beveled object in here. And we can bring in objects by doing an object info node. The object info node, we have this little collection item here, and we can go ahead and grab a cube beveled and throw that into the instance slot. Now, by default, everything is going to be a little bit too big. You can see it's just way too big right now. So what we can do now is just go to our instance on points, go to the scale XYZ, and just do 0.5 on that to cut that in half. And there we go. Now we have our full idle animation set up, and then we'll have a full node network in the cheat sheets below.